Welcome back, students. Now we'll be starting a very important part of the epidemiology chapter, and that is the actual epidemiological studies. Herein, whatever we talked till now will be applied into the actual studies, and we'll see what are the various epidemiological studies, what are their indications, what are their advantages, disadvantages, and what are the rates and ratios that we get out of these studies, and how do we come to a conclusion. So the whole process in a nutshell will be covered in the slides to come. First of all, as you can see on the slide in front of you, you have basically two kinds of studies. The first kind of study is called as a observational study. Observational study is nothing but a study wherein you observe, so you don't intervene. That is essentially what an observational study is. The second type of study is experimental study. As the name indicates, experimental study, you do an experiment in which you, looking at what you have on your slide right now, is a very beautiful diagram showing you the importance of incidence and prevalence. In most likelihood, you are bound to have this diagram in one or the other examinations. We'll go through the slide one by one. Try to form a hypothesis. Okay, so we try to form a logic behind an experiment. Say for example, you have a disease and you want a hypothesis for that disease. So you want a causative organism or you want a correlation for that disease. This correlation is called as a hypothesis. A hypothesis is essentially a supposition which you arrive by observation or reflection. Okay, so for example, you say that my hypothesis is all the beautiful girls go to physiotherapy. Okay, and none comes to the other fields. So you say that, okay, we'll test this hypothesis. So this is a hypothesis, this is not proved. You feel that this might be true, you feel that this might not be true. So this is a hypothesis, this is your reflection, your observation, and you think that this might be true. But to prove this, you will have to do some or the other kind of study. So this is a hypothesis. So observational studies are basically tools to make hypothesis. Okay, they are tools to make hypothesis. Remember, hypothesis is not causality. Hypothesis does not tell you anything beyond a mere association between the two things. To test this hypothesis, now we are going further, we are going one step ahead, and we'll do a study to really see whether this hypothesis of ours stands true. Okay, if this hypothesis is good enough or is it false. A hypothesis may be true, it may be false. What you believe may be true, it may be wrong. So we do an experimental study. The very function of the experimental studies is not to formulate a hypothesis. They are too costly, too laborious, too big, everything. Okay, they are done on a large scale. So we cannot afford to do an experimental study for formulation of a hypothesis. We do an experimental study for testing a hypothesis. This is broadly about these two studies, what they do, what for they are used for. Observational studies, going further, we have the most basic study which is always done is descriptive epidemiology. If you remember the examples of James Lind that I gave you, the doctor who had the cure of scurvy, who was a naval doctor, what he did was basically this kind of study. He did not know anything about the disease, no diagnosis, no cure, no treatment, and still he was able to give a treatment for the symptoms of the sailors. So that was basically the beginning step of epidemiology and was an example of descriptive epidemiology, wherein you just describe the disease and you associate patterns and performances of other factors associated with the disease so that you know the association between the disease and some external factor. So that is the very first step. Descriptive epidemiology will be again seeing in detail. Don't worry about it right now. The second observational study is analytical study. Analytical study, again, as you can see there, are further subcategorized as cross-sectional study, also called as a prevalence study. Then you have a case control study followed by a cohort, which is also called as a follow-up study. We'll be dealing this individually and then we'll see what these studies are. Experimental studies are today gold standard. They are gold standard for any new drug, any new intervention, any new program. So if you have an MCQ which says, give me an example of a study which would be done for new anything, program, tablet, capsule, medicine, intervention, surgery, new RCT, associate these two words very firmly in your head anything new is to be tested, today we do a RCT. RCT is randomized controlled trial. Again, we'll be dealing this also in detail, but anything new, do a RCT. Today's gold standard test is RCT. Then you have field trials and community trials. We won't be dealing too much in field trials and community trials because they are just experimental studies, but field trials, as you can see on the slides, are done in healthy people and community trials are done in communities. Now, you might be thinking, what is this? Field trials are done in people and community trials are done in communities. Communities, we compare one city to another, okay? And in field trials, we compare the people of one city to the people of another. So data collection basically in community trials is regarding the communities as a whole, and in field trials, the data collection is about the people. That is the only difference that we have between these two type of experimental studies. So what is important for you in the examination would be from this slide, the descriptive epidemiology, cross-sectional, case control, cohort, as well as RCT. So let's start with each of these individually. Each one of them is very important, has got its own advantages and disadvantages. By the end, you will be very much perplexed about what study to use. So I have again formulated a complete slide for you which gives you the indication when to use what kind of study. Okay, this is another very good photograph about what study to use. You can see on your slides, it has got three kinds of studies shown: cross-sectional study, cohort study, as well as case control study. Just look at it right now. Do not try to understand this slide. We'll come back to this slide when we are done with each types of studies. First of all, the first investigation that we always do when we are in the dark is descriptive epidemiology. Okay, so descriptive epidemiology, this is the first phase of epidemiological investigation. Remember, this is done to formulate a hypothesis. You do not know anything about the disease, or the knowledge is very much superficial, it's just a reflection of a doctor. We embark on descriptive studies. Descriptive studies are done for observing distribution of the disease as well as identifying characteristics of the disease. So as I told you, we know very less about the disease. So this is the starting step. I want to correlate this disease with some demographic or other parameters and find out what the disease is associated with. These are the steps of descriptive epidemiology. First of all, we define the population. Then we go ahead and define the disease. Then we describe the disease, measurement of the disease, comparing with known indices, and formulation of the hypothesis. So these are the steps in descriptive epidemiology. Fortunately for you people, you will be not giving a written exam, so you need not remember all these points. But what I expect is at least you know what steps comes after what, so that you may have a MCQ not asking you the whole steps of these descriptive studies, but you may sure have a question which states that what comes after what. So that is at least expected that you know which step comes after what. Let us take on the first slide here, defining the population. Composition of the population is in terms of age, sex, occupation, culture, as well as other characteristics. The population is defined as whole population. You can take a representative sample or you can have specially selected groups. Now, if the disease under question is fairly common, many people in the community are getting affected by the disease, obviously it is easy to get a whole population sample. But if the disease is not very common or it is difficult to diagnose the disease, this mode of data collection would be very difficult. For obvious reasons, the disease is not diagnosable or it is rare in the community, it would be very difficult to get cases for a study. So therefore, whole population has these limitations. The next source of population would be a representative sample of the population. So you can have a sample out of the whole population which is representative of the whole community, and that can also give you a very good idea about the disease. This is done more often than not, because you see, if you have to do a research, you cannot include a whole community. The sample size would be very large. The cost and the time required for the study would be prohibitive. So what we do is we take a small sample out of this whole population and we then extrapolate the results of the study group onto the population. For those of you who are starting to lose track, let's calm down and let's look at this diagrammatically so it is more clear. Say for example, this is the whole population. I want to derive the height of this population. Now if this population consists of 1000 people, it would be very tedious for me to go to all 1000 people and then take their heights. So what I do, I randomly select a small sample out of them. I say these are 100 people, and I go to these 100 people and take the height of these 100 people. And then whatever the average height is, I say okay, the average height of this population is that much. So if I say that the average height of these 100 people were 5 feet, I say the average height of the population would be very much close to 5 feet. So for practical reasons, we cannot take the whole universe as a sample. So we take a small quantity out of the whole population and then we extrapolate the results of that small sample to the whole population. So that is basically used in epidemiology. The only condition here is this sample that you take should be representative of the population that you have. Okay. Now how do you do that? We'll see that in the sampling lecture. But this is what basically sampling is, and we usually rationalize the number of patients that we have by this method. You can also do the study in specially defined groups if the study needs that, if the study warrants that the study be done in specially defined groups, say for example radiologists or pathologists or coal miners. So depending upon the requirement of the study, we can have specially selected groups. Why defining is crucial? Again, you want the denominator. Okay, remember we are people in search of the denominators. The numerator was the easy part, the denominator was the difficult part. So we want a good denominator, and therefore defining the population is crucial. Coming to defining the disease, here you have a couple of considerations more. When you define the disease, for a clinician, a clinical definition is good enough. Say for example, if we say I have to diagnose a tonsillitis, a kid comes to me, I ask him to open his mouth and I see red enlarged tonsils. The patient gives me a history of difficulty of deglutition. So it is very easy for me that this is probably a case of pharyngitis or it is a case of tonsillitis. But if I have to do an epidemiological study, this definition is not good enough. Why? Because there is a lot of subjectivity inherent in this definition. So what I want a very specific definition. I want a definition which says erythema into the pharynx plus tonsillar enlargement plus a culture which isolates basically streptococci. So this is a very specific definition, and that would be then my inclusion criteria. So if these criteria are met, okay, I'll include that case. If these criteria are not met, I'll have to exclude that case. So operational definitions are specific definitions which give you a definitive diagnosis. Okay. Clinical definitions can be vague. Say for example, if we make a diagnosis of tonsillitis, later on the patient goes back. If you feel that the diagnosis was wrong, the patient can come back to you again and you can revise the treatment. But if the operational definition is wrong, once you take the person as a case, there is precious little afterwards that you can do for it. Okay, so operational definitions are more specific. Clinical definitions can be more relaxed. If operational definitions are not given beforehand, these can be very powerful source of errors in the study. As I said, if you have misclassification, the whole study can be off guard. Okay, so classification of the patients is very important, and therefore we need a very strong operational definition. Coming to describing the disease. When we describe the disease, we have certain objectives. Occurrence and distribution of the disease in time, place and person. This is the first objective. We have to describe the disease in time, place and person. This is very common. You might also have heard this when you go to your rounds and when you check for the orientation of the patient, you ask time, place and person. So the same philosophy applies to descriptive disease also. You want to know the time, the place and the people the disease affects. Time distribution, place distribution and person distribution. Very important. We'll be seeing this in further slides. The first thing, time distribution. Time distribution, we want to know when the disease occurs. Now there can be a lot of time distributions, say diurnal variation. For example, in the case of Mycobacterium tuberculosis patients have fever in the evening. Tuberculosis patients have fever in the evening. So they demonstrate evening rise of temperature which responds to antipyretics. Okay, so this is a kind of diurnal variation. So even the disease can vary in a day. There are some diseases which vary on daily basis. Say for example, malarial fever, a kind of malarial fever you have which the fever alternates on alternate days. So one day you have fever, the other day you do not have fever. On the third day you again have fever. So these are examples of time distribution. This is very important because the time distribution itself could lead you to the clues about the disease. Three types of time distribution we will study basically today, and they are short-term fluctuations, periodic fluctuations, as well as long-term fluctuations. Coming to the first and probably the most important for you in the examination would be the short-term fluctuations. And you have a subtopic here which is epidemic. This can itself be a source of a lot of MCQs. So this is a high yield part of descriptive epidemiology. So please understand this well. The community or region and the time period in which the cases occur are specified precisely because we want the time where the symptoms appear. Then you have periodic fluctuations. As I said, you can have seasonal trends. Measles and varicella are common in early springs. Upper respiratory tract infections are common in winter months, and GIT infections are common in summer months. Now, some of these diseases we very well know why this variation is there. For GIT infections, why is it more in summers? Have you heard about the life cycle of flies? House flies? House flies have a rapid reproductive cycle in warmer climates. So in summers they have a faster reproductive cycle. So you have progressive generations of flies coming into play very rapidly, and therefore you have increased transmission of GIT infections. For upper respiratory tract infections, it is obvious that they are mostly because of viruses, and viruses love cold. So viruses are basically preserved in cold, so therefore you have increased transmission in winters. So this is periodic fluctuations. Some researchers are of the belief that seasonal trends are a subcategory of periodic fluctuations, and we should not have a problem with that. That is okay. It is not wrong to say that. Then you have cyclic trends. Cyclic trends, when we say the disease occurs in cycles over short period of time, which can be days or weeks. I already gave you the example. Coming to the important subtopic that I was talking about, the epidemic. Epidemic, if you go back to the last slide, let me show you here, is a type of a short-term fluctuation in the disease pattern. So that is an epidemic. If I have to define epidemic for you, the most simple definition of epidemic would be the occurrence of cases in a community more than what is expected. Now the most important word in this definition is expected. What is expected? Okay. So how do we come to the conclusion of what is expected? Expected is basically taken as plus minus 1.96 SD. That is plus minus 1.96 of standard deviation of the mean. Now when we will talk about statistics, we will see what this is in detail. But for a layman's term, expected rate would be, say for example, for the last 5 years, if you have no case of a disease in the community, the expected rate of disease this year is 0. Okay, if last 5 years there was no disease, I do not expect the disease to be present in this year, and therefore the expected rate would be 0. So this is how we have an idea of expected rate of the disease. So epidemic is anything which is beyond the expected rate of the disease. Say for example, if you take United Kingdom does not have a case of rabies. Okay, at least they do not have native rabies. All the cases of rabies ever in United Kingdom would be exotic. Exotic means out of the native place. Exotic diseases. Exotic diseases are diseases which are not native to the country. They are imported from outside. Okay, exotic. So rabies, if there is a rabies case in United Kingdom, that would be called as a epidemic. How many number of cases? I am talking about just one case. If there is one case in UK of rabies, that is an epidemic. Now how is it an epidemic with one case? Again the same philosophy. The expected rate was 0. 1 is above 0. So it is a epidemic. And this definition is very important to understand, because many a times we think that epidemic means lot of cases over a very short period of time. That definition empirically is true, but technically you can get the MCQ wrong. Okay, if the expected rate of a disease is 0, and even if you have one case, technically by definition that is an epidemic. Okay.